Welcome everyone. In today's video, we are going to talk about setting boundaries. And this recently came up in our ethics training that we did just last week. We do a ethics and healthy boundaries for helping professionals training about every other month. And one of the parts of the presentation has to do with boundaries. And the students in the class requested that we talk more about the recipe for how to set boundaries. So I thought that would make a great video to post and give you guys some more information on. So let me share my screen here and we'll talk a little bit about this slide that we went over in class. Now, what I love about this is that it's a really simple recipe for how to set boundaries. And you might think that we all just naturally know how to set boundaries, but that's actually not true. For a lot of us, we grew up in households as kids where setting boundaries was not something that we learned about. Maybe the adults around us didn't show us how to set boundaries, or if we were in a tougher household, then maybe when we tried to set boundaries, they were discouraged. And so there are a lot of reasons why people can reach adulthood and not really understand how to set boundaries. But the good news is it's something that you can learn and practice. So this is just a simple recipe with some basic steps for how to set boundaries. I've used these steps myself and they work well. So you can use them for yourself. You can also use them for your clients if you're in a clinical setting and you have a client who's struggling to set boundaries consistently or feeling really uncomfortable when they set boundaries, then this can be a simple recipe for them to stick to. So here's some basic steps. Step number one is recognize and validate your own feelings. So that means you have to tune in to what's going on inside of your body. Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling hurt? Kind of taking a minute and tuning in and trying to name what is the feeling that I'm having right now. And then validating that feeling instead of saying things to yourself like, oh, I shouldn't feel that way, or why am I getting so angry about this? That's wrong. Or I don't want to be an angry person, so I'm not going to feel angry. All of those statements, although there may be good intentions behind them, all of those statements are pretty invalidating. So you want to stop once you've recognized your feeling and validate your own feeling. And maybe say something more like, I can see why I'm feeling so angry right now. Or it makes sense that I'm feeling sad right now. So that's validating your own feeling. That is the most important part of this whole thing. If you don't do that, the rest of the steps are going to be very difficult. So you may just want to stop and just practice step one. Maybe that's where you're at right now, is just working on validating your own feelings. Step number two is recognizing how your boundaries have been crossed. So if somebody has crossed one of your boundaries, stopping and thinking about what is it they did that feels like they crossed my boundaries? Did they get too close to me in my personal space? Did they touch me in a way that I wasn't comfortable with? Did they hug me when I wasn't comfortable with a hug, for instance? Or did they say something to me that didn't feel good and it feels like they crossed a boundary there somehow? So figuring out what boundary was crossed. Was it physical? Was it emotional? Verbal? There's no real wrong answer, but it's important that you know for yourself what boundary was crossed. And then step three, recognize how you need to set your boundary. What is it that you need to say or do to help this person be aware that they've crossed your boundary? So if you were going to explain it, how would you explain it? You can also practice explaining it to the person that didn't break your boundary. So you could practice explaining it to yourself. You could practice explaining it to somebody that you're not upset with, or a close friend that you trust that can give you feedback and tell you, yeah, what you said made sense. I could understand what you were saying versus, no, that's not really clear. If I was the other person in this scenario, I still wouldn't understand how I'd crossed your boundary. So it's good to run it by somebody if you have someone that you can run it by. Now, steps 1, 2, and 3, if you are not used to setting boundaries, that might be really uncomfortable for you. And so step 4 is really important too. Use some grounding exercises. If you've gone through steps 1 and 2 and 3, and you're starting to feel a lot of anxiety or panic when you're thinking about setting the boundary, that's a good cue for you to stop and do some grounding exercises. So grounding exercises, we can talk about in another video, but it's basically exercises that help bring your mind into the here and now. Because when our emotions start running away with us, we kind of lose track of where we are right now and maybe the fact that we're safe right now. So if I'm going to do a simple grounding exercise, I might take a minute and breathe and just notice my feet on the floor. And then maybe notice my hands on the table and what that feels like. Maybe look around the room and count the number of pictures on the wall. Or if I'm outside, count the number of trees that I see. Okay, simple stuff, but it helps bring your mind and your thinking back into the present. And that can be helpful if setting boundaries is something that makes you feel panicked or scared. If your boundaries in relationships have been weak, number one, know that you're not alone. Setting boundaries can be really hard for some of us. So there's 2 common issues. One is that you might get backlash from the other person when you set the boundary. They might be upset with you. They might try to say something that gets you to back off and not hold your boundary. And so that might be something that you're worried about. Or you might feel guilty for setting a boundary. You might feel guilty about stating your needs and letting somebody know that they've crossed your boundary. Again, these 2 issues tend to be tied to your childhood stuff. When you tried to set boundaries as a kiddo and you had backlash, or you were kind of made to feel guilty. So if you find that those issues keep coming up for you over and over again, that might be a great thing to talk out with a therapist at some point, or with a good friend, or in a support group of some kind. Step 5, here's where you're actually doing it. All of this is just build up to actually setting that boundary. So step 5, communicate your boundary to the other person. And remember, you're not responsible for what they do with the boundary. So you could set the boundary and do a fantastic job. You could say everything right. You could be totally clear and kind, and still the other person might get upset. But just remember, that doesn't mean that you did it wrong necessarily. So take that information and then maybe talk it out with somebody. Tell them about what happened and see if there's any feedback. Maybe they can see something you could have done differently, or maybe they'll say, it sounds like you did great, but the other person didn't take it very well. Remember, if we're not somebody that sets boundaries often, then the people around us might be kind of shocked when we start setting boundaries, and they may not know what to do with it, really. And so their reaction might be angry or shocked, or they might argue with us. Like, how could you set this boundary with me? You don't have boundaries. So it's going to take the people around you a while to get used to this new idea that you do have boundaries and that you will set them. If the relationship is worth it and they care about you, then they will work through this period of transition with you, and they will appreciate the new you that sets boundaries. If there's somebody that doesn't want to be around you, if you're setting healthy boundaries for yourself, then as a therapist, I would say, wow, that's really great information for you to know. If this person only wants to have a relationship with you when you don't have any boundaries, maybe that's not a healthy person to have in your life. Maybe that's just something to think about and mull over for a while. You don't have to take any drastic measures, but it's good information for you to know. Other parts of step 5: walk away from arguments and take care of yourself. So, if you're setting a boundary with someone and they start arguing with you and things get intense, it is okay to step away and say, gosh, I need to take some time for myself to calm down. That's always okay to do. You never have to feel bad about taking care of yourself. And walking away from an argument is sometimes the way to do that. Remember, arguments from the other person indicate that they don't respect your boundary. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to take drastic action right away, but that is really good information for you to know and something for you to think about when you're deciding who you want in your life and whether or not they're healthy for you. Step 6 is take care of yourself. Remember, setting boundaries is difficult when you're not used to doing it. So be kind to yourself. Remember, you are learning a new skill. You're not going to do it perfectly every time, but you will learn from the process and you will get better at it. And maybe even someday you'll feel great about setting and maintaining a boundary. So I hope that this was helpful to you. I think this is great information for both therapists and clients to utilize because we all have times when we need to learn how to set boundaries and we need to kind of revisit that information. So if you enjoyed this video, check out our other videos on YouTube. And if you want to be alerted when we post a new informational video, then hit the subscribe and notification buttons. Thank you very much. Have a great day.